What the is going on in the LCS? What are we seeing with these teams right now? Cloud9 keeps losing, like you mentioned, Emily, making some changes, trying some things, not working out for them necessarily in execution. And then you got Team Liquid. All of a sudden, they're keeping up with C9. They are statistically looking like, in some ways, a superior team, or at least top of the tables in some of their execution and some of their play. But are those numbers, Emily, deceiving, particularly as it pertains to Team Liquid being a top team in the LCS?
Yeah, so I really like this Team Liquid team. I feel like I always have to preface whenever I'm going to criticize a team with, like, I actually do really think this team can be legitimately good, but I don't think they're legitimately good right now. And there are a few reasons for that. One, I think prior to the season starting, I talked to Broxa about how they really wanted to be like a more proactive team early. And I feel like we have not seen that. And one of the things that I was really looking forward to going into the split was to see if the Jensen like Broxa synergy would come to fruition. Because that was, I think, one of the things that people were really hoping for from this team is to have Jensen find a jungler that he actually looks like really strong with. Because even on previous teams when he was performing really well, I feel like we've never seen him find that jungler that he just syncs with like really, really, really well. And so while I actually think he's still playing well individually, I think that they're not making the most of, I guess, what could come out of like a really strong mid jungle synergy. And we're just not seeing that. Like there are games where Broxa just looks really disconnected from a lot of his lanes. And they have like, so some of their numbers are really, really good because they're winning, right? But then if you look at some of their other numbers, like for example, their first blood rate, and not that first blood is always everything, because you can be proactive and still be syncing with your lanes as a jungler without necessarily getting kills, right? Like we saw I think contracts with 100T when they beat C9 was a really good example of this on Olaf. Like he wasn't necessarily going in and murdering everyone in lanes early. He was garnering advantages. He was counter jungling. You know, he was doing a lot to accrue advantages, and he was still paying attention to his lanes, but it wasn't like a very visible like kill thing. But I do think, you know, the low first blood rate, they have a fairly low dragon control when you compare them to a top team like C9, or even a team that I do think has a legitimately strong early game, which is Golden Guardians, actually, where they have like a 61%. Cloud9 is a 72%. Obviously, it's going to be inflated because they've won so much. But, you know, Team Liquid have won just as many games now, and they have a 44% dragon control rate. So, like, they're small like cracks, and I think a lot of Team Liquid's wins have definitely come from either a misexecution from their opponents, like for example Core JJ's blitz hook capitalizing on the fact that C9 are you know kind of misplaying their composition a bit, right? And then Blabber goes in, and then Team Liquid is able to go from there. Like I do think they have the intelligence to punish opponents' mistakes, which is why they are so high in the standings right now. But I want to see more from this TL team because I feel like they have the talent to be better. And I want to see them perform even better, because I do think right now their win rate is not necessarily indicative of how well they've been playing. And they've had a lot of really close wins that have come from kind of a flip in the mid to late game that TL have capitalized on.
I agree. It's actually, I was going to get into my broader point as we're going to get into next about my thoughts on the LCS that's split. But the thing is, Team Liquid's record looks great, and I do think they have a higher gear, but they're not forced to show it. It's very similar to Cloud9, right? Where these teams, I feel, I'm not saying they're looking towards Worlds. I'm not saying that they're prepping for Worlds, because I'm sure Team Liquid just wants to make it to the playoffs and make it to a final with their new team if possible. But it's complacency where it's like, you don't have to be at an 8 out of 10 to win games in the LCS. You can play. Team Liquid has enough talent to play at a 5 out of 10 level, play the scaling comp till 35 minutes, and win games off of that. Just not playing stupid. It's the reason why Immortals did so well last split. They were mechanically, one of the bottom teams in the table, and eventually they get figured out, but they won a lot of their games last split because they just weren't done. And that's kind of a requirement in some games for the LCS. But a lot of times it just comes down to which team is less stupid in that game. Who makes the least amount of mistakes? And for Team Liquid, they aren't making a ton of mistakes. They're not being very proactive. But in a league where there's so many teams that are just giving away games, there's so many games in split where Dignitas and CLG have literally done nothing and just kind of let the game just slip away. And it's like, all right, you take that dragon, you take that dragon. Oh, you want to take a Baron? Go take a Baron. We're just gonna lean back into our nexus until you finally beat us. Like in the LCS, a lot of times it's who can make the least amount of mistakes. And for a team like C9 and Team Liquid, especially C9, who are just trying things out, they are very confident that they will make it the World Championship of just because of the level of LCS right now. There's not a lot of a hunger or a really a push to really try anything new when the old things are working. For Team Liquid, if scaling to 35 minutes, getting tactical on a 6-item Ezreal or a 6-item Aphelios and just playing standard works, they're not going to change anything because the LCS teams aren't really pushing them to change or be better than what they are. And that's kind of the sadness of LCS is that we're not getting pushed. There's no real. It's bland. It's so bland. And as someone who's covered the LCS on the ground for 5 straight years, this is one of we'll get into it in a little bit, but it's such a not fun season watch. Like this is probably the least amount of fun I've ever had watching the LCS.